Living in California, the only Mexican-American figure many learn about is Cesar Chavez. Although Chavez contributed much to the Mexican community in the United States, there are many other important and unrecognized Mexican-American figures that have been left out of the history textbooks. In a deep dive into the work of Chicano activists that I personally had never heard about, I came across the story of Rodolfo Corky Gonzales, who was born on June 12, 1928 in the state of Colorado. Gonzales was raised in the barrio of Denver by his Mexican father along with 8 other siblings. The family had moved to Colorado due to the growing sugar beet and potato economy, which required the labor of Mexican farm workers. Rodolfo Gonzales earned the nickname of Corky from his siblings, as he was an energetic and spirited person. Although Gonzales' family was very poor, Rodolfo was a very determined and bright man as he entered the University of Denver, but ultimately dropped out after a year due to financial issues. Corky then became a decorated professional boxer fighting in the featherweight division. After a career in boxing, Corky Gonzales turned to a different business venture, such as owning a sports bar and a bail bonds business. As Corky became more involved into business affairs, it ultimately led to him becoming a prominent voice for the Mexican-American community during the 1960s to 1970s. During this same period, the Vietnam War was an ongoing conflict that was becoming a turbulent issue in American society. It was a conflict between the North and South regimes from 1955 to 1975. The country of Vietnam was in a limbo of power between the Vietnamese communist wing and the established regime. At the same time, the Cold War was ongoing between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, so the tension in Vietnam further fueled the anti-communist ideology in American politics. During this same time, the U.S. feared the spread of communism in Asia, which would aid the Soviet Union in gaining a foothold of power in the region. The U.S. believed that if Vietnam fell to communism, then other Asian countries would quickly follow. This led to American intervention in Vietnam as the U.S. backed the Army of the Republic, but eventually the U.S. officially joined the war. Back at home, the involvement in Vietnam was so controversial as Americans believed that it was an unnecessary war that stood on immoral and incorrect political grounds. Overall, the poor and disenfranchised Americans were disproportionately affected by the Vietnam War. This is due to those who could not afford to go to college, were selected for service, and were not spared from enlisting in the Army, as they were considered to be non-critical or necessary to society. In a speech given on August 6, 1966 to the members of the Denver Stop the War Committee, in which Corky Gonzales expressed opposition to U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War, Corky criticizes the blatant disregard for human life and peace, along with stating that the war in Vietnam was financially costly, drafted men to their death, and had diverted America into a social crisis. If the U.S. abstained from the continued conflict with Vietnam, Corky believed that it would restore peace and humanity. Corky reveals that the main issue with the U.S. involvement in Vietnam is not political, but rather economical. He poses the question of, who benefits from war? Is it those that send men to the end of their lives as they kill other innocent people of another country? Or does ridding communism from the world truly benefit it? Corky ends his speech by stating that peace is dignity, that those who refrain from conflict could achieve becoming a noble humanitarian nation that strives to maintain the sanctity of human life through peace. As during the Vietnam War, the majority of the drafted soldiers consisted of poor and working-class Americans who were being sent to fight the war in the interests of American politicians. Ultimately, Corky calls for people to realize that behind all the smokes and mirrors lies the human truth. In context, the Mexican community was greatly afflicted by the Vietnam War. It is estimated that though 10% of the U.S. was classified as Latino during the height of the Vietnam War, studies suggest Mexican Americans accounted for around 20% of Vietnam deaths. In another initial figure from the Library of Congress, over 80,000 Hispanic Americans served in the Vietnam War. People of color were disproportionately affected by the Vietnam War, as Latino, Black, and Native Americans were called upon to serve in the war. Despite the non-white population being the minority in the U.S., they made up a significant portion of military casualties in Vietnam. The disparity of brown-bodied soldiers fighting in Vietnam sparked the anger of the Mexican-American community back home. The Chicano community felt the impact of the war, which resulted in activists such as Corky Gonzales advocating against the conflict. In 1970, the Mexican-American community of East Los Angeles rallied together in a march known as the Chicano Moratorium. The demonstration protested the war and the disparity of Chicano soldiers that were being sent to Vietnam. Altogether, Rodolfo Corky Gonzales was a Chicano activist that fought and represented the marginalized community of Mexicans in the United States. Corky Gonzales advocated for many issues that the Mexicans experienced, but in this case, Corky revealed the Chicano sentiment on the Vietnam War, along with campaigning for the end of U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War.